but people are very, very caught up with this. And I want to start by saying, remember the 5th of November. 1605, 419 years before the election that just took place last week, Guy Fawkes tries to literally blow up the government. And now, 419 years later, we put a man in power who might do just that. It is a fascinating turn of events. And I want to start by telling all of you, in case you don't know, my own political leanings, which is that I am not a Democrat. I have never voted for a Democrat in my life, and I certainly would not have voted for Kamala Harris. I'll be honest with you. She failed the bar. I mean, you can't work at my law firm if you didn't pass the bar the first time. So to me, that was disqualifying. But I'm also on record saying I am not a Republican. I would never have voted for Donald Trump. In my opinion, the guy tried to overthrow the government. The end, right? For me, that's also pretty disqualifying. So as I look at the choices that this country had, I see a fundamental problem. And in my view, and so I want to talk about, something that it's really kind of at the heart of what's wrong with our country right now. And if I can, I want to remind everybody, I don't consider myself Democrat or Republican. I'm an American. I believe in this country. And if I had to choose what country I would be a citizen of, it would be America. And not because we've got bombs and guns, and not because we make great television shows, or even because we make great smartphones, but because this is the first country in the history of the world that was founded on philosophy. And a guy named Thomas Jefferson, who's deeply, deeply devout in studying natural law and the social contract and how to provide freedom to people against a government, spent his entire life preparing to write a document known as the Declaration of Independence, and then later part of the Constitution. And that Constitution was crafted for the first time, literally, folks, for the first time in history, was crafted to assure freedom to people. That had literally never happened before. I hope that you all know that. We take it for granted now, but it had never occurred before our Constitution. And so when I look at our Constitution, I look at the particular genius and the time spent to do one thing above all others: separate powers. Separate powers. Because the fundamental belief at that time was that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if that is true, then we're about to see absolute corruption, because Donald J. Trump now has absolute power over this country. And I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat or something else. If that doesn't at least bother you a little bit, then you need to go back and read your Constitution, okay? Because it should. The Constitution was never designed, ever, to have all three branches of government operating for one man. It was never designed that way. It was the opposite. The problem, though, right out of the gate, was that these things, these conspiracies of people called political parties, started immediately going to work to try to hack our Constitution and take over our country. And it didn't work for over 200 years. But just last week, on November 5th, for the first time ever, it worked, in the sense that all three branches of this government, including the courts, are now very, very right-leaning. Even though this was a very narrow election, right? Very narrow election, this ultimately is going to result in what I believe is a revolution, which means that everything we think we know about how the law works might change now. Everything. I was on stage in front of 900 advertising lawyers 2 days ago. And I got on stage and I told them, look, guys, you attorneys are going to be more necessary than ever before. Your advice is going to be more important than ever before. You have to really, really pay attention to everything now, because your clients are going to need your advice. And it's through that lens, through that spirit, with that kind of understanding, that I come here today to talk with all of you, to tell you that we're going to do our best today to predict what's going to happen. But right now, we are in a historic time. And I know it might not feel like it. It might not feel like we're part of a revolution right now, right? There's no guns, there's no tanks rolling down the street. But believe me, trust me, when you see Matt Gaetz being nominated to be the Attorney General of the United States of America, folks, this is a revolution, and it's over, okay? One side is won, and that side has that complete control now. And when that happens, the next step is something called the purge, for those of you that have studied history. I'm not going to talk any more about that, but I want you to think about that as we move through this. But the bottom line is, I'm going to do my best to kind of answer questions. I'm going to do this from a traditionalist standpoint, meaning that we assume that everything stays more or less the way that it was before. We still have, courts that operate more or less the way they did before. We have rules that apply more or less the way that they did before. All of this could change. Please keep in mind, anything is on the table. When I wrote that on my blog, I was not kidding. Anything is on the table right now because all of the power has now been consolidated into one group of people. So anything could happen. And we can't make assumptions that we know where these people are going to land on any particular issue.